What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Captain Deadwake here, and today we're going to learn all about decoupled flight. I'm going to do this in 3 parts. This first video is basically just going to go over the settings, the concept, and general practice and landing in decoupled mode. So decoupled mode, just to get to the point, is basically your ship behaving like it's actually in microgravity. So regardless of what direction you're pointing, you're still moving. You can see your speed on your ship. It's very important that you make sure to familiarize yourself with that, so you're understanding how fast you're going, how much time you might have to correct course, if you might be heading at an object, which is what a lot of people tend to be afraid of when it comes to decoupled flight, is losing control or not knowing where you're going. We're going to jump into some settings and look at stuff that I think everybody should know about when it comes to decoupled flight. When you scroll down, there is a D-Flight decoupled on button. This has never worked for me, so I will link the issue console for it down below. That is confirmed since 2024, so maybe we can bring it back to some relevance by people kind of resubmitting evidence for this working or not. Scrolling down a little bit, we're going to get into gravity and wind compensation in part 2 of the video that will be dropping shortly after this one. This has to do with your behavior in flight and how in the past people would go into coupled mode whenever they'd be near planets or moons to avoid gravity or wind issues, and now you don't have to worry about that, so you can just stay decoupled. As we're going through this, of course, pause, look at my settings, maybe match some of what I'm doing to get into how I fly. I try to maximize my authority over the ship. I don't like the game nerfing anything. That is why I have G-Safe default to off. I also have boost disabling G-Safe just in case. I also have proximity assist off, so I don't have any thrust dampeners when I'm near objects. I want full authority of my vessel. Now, something I've recently turned on is actually speed limiter. You guys have heard me probably talk about parking brakes, and I kept hitting the / key on my keyboard to turn it on and off. Well, now it just stays on, and I use my tab on my stick, which by default is left alt and scroll wheel on your mouse, to set that limiter wherever I want. So if it's time to go, I release the limiter all the way up to full speed. You guys can even use it to give yourself partial speed when you're practicing with decoupled flight, and then I take it all the way down to 0 to hold me completely still as a parking brake, and we'll demonstrate that especially in part 2 with planetary and moon flying. Outside of that, scrolling down a little bit further, the most important thing that I would do, especially for new decoupled flyers, is put your velocity indicator to always on. So that way it doesn't fade away when it's right in front of your ship. You have no doubt where your velocity indicator is pointing. You know where your ship is going at all times. That is crucial, especially as you're getting used to how this works. Another natural limiter you're going to have is whether or not you're in SCM mode or in nav mode. As you guys know, under boost, you have a certain amount of authority on your vessel. I'm under my speed limiter mode right now, which is why it's not going any faster. I can tick that all the way up to give it full power. But once your boost stops or you stop applying that extra force, you're limited to your top SCM, which in our case is 199. So that might be a good way to practice as well, so you're not going over your authority. But a very important lesson here is if you boost and you are going over that and then you stop boosting and try to change directions, your ship, until it returns to its SCM speed, will not give you control authority. So you'll be locked in that direction until your speed drops down to SCM and you regain thrust authority. So that is something that has bit me in the rear before and put me right into an asteroid or a station or whatever I am actually looking at. With the influx of new players, not everybody knows about nav mode, which is what you do to go into your quantum travel state, but what it also does is once this right side here fully spools up, you have a lot more speed that you can get out of your ship. Most ships hitting about 1 kilometer a second or faster once you get up to that full power. This is where maybe your speed limiter can come into play if you like traveling in nav mode, in decoupled. I recommend you try to make it hard for yourself though. Try not to take the easy route with any of the extra G-Safe settings or your speed limiter too much. Get comfortable with throwing yourself around and trusting that you're not going to hit anything, and that gets into the velocity indicator. So what you're seeing here, this is your retrograde indicator, and it's got the little line through it, kind of like a no smoking symbol. If you look behind yourself now, you see where you're going. Prograde is an open circle. You can also move it with your thrust if you're like going at an asteroid and you need to make sure you don't hit something. To get to your look behind option, if you didn't know we had that, go to keybinds, advanced controls, top option, third one down, and bind it wherever it makes sense to you. I have it on my stick, on my left stick down by my pinky, so I can have quick access to looking behind my ship to, quickly make sure I'm not going to run into anything. It builds that confidence as you're getting used to that decoupled flight. One thing you've likely seen me do with the whole C is a flip and burn. So we are already pointing in the opposite direction, but the whole point of this is you're putting your main thrusters at that retrograde indicator, so when you apply thrust, you slow down as fast as possible. It's not quite as important in your smaller ships that have some decent retrograde thrusters, which retrograde means thrusters that push against your forward vector. So it's these nice big bright ones when you're trying to slow down. What Coupled is doing is always using all of your boosters to try to return you to 0 every time, versus letting you fly like you would see in shows like The Expanse or Battlestar Galactica, where your forward momentum is kept regardless of what angle or direction you're pushing your ship in. It helps if you kind of think about this like you would in Kerbal Space Program or in any other actual space related thing. You know, you have your attitude control thrusters or your maneuvering thrusters on the sides that'll change the angle of your ship, but due to Newtonian physics, you know, you have constant motion in one direction unless acted upon by another force, which would either be your coupled flight simulating friction or you using your thrusters to slow down. If you're wondering, some of the benefits to this type of flight is that you maintain that constant velocity in the direction you need to go. So if you are trying to travel into a station, you can take your hands off of your controls. You can, you know, if you're in a ship that has it, take a drink, eat food, set contracts, mess with your Moby glass, making sure your velocity indicator is pointing at something, or sorry, pointing at nothing rather, pointing at an area of space that you're not going to hit something. And then you have that freedom to just kind of cruise in. You know, it takes a lot of that strain off and lets you really kind of live in a space environment when it comes to these ships. Not to mention you get a lot more potential in maximizing your ship's capabilities based on whether or not you let yourself black out. So depending on the ships that you main and that you fly a lot, it is important to understand where your VTOL button is so you can have a quick toggle when it comes to activating it. Mine is on my left upper trigger. On my VKBs, you have your main gun trigger, which on my left is my boost, and then the top trigger, which pulling it in is actually my space brake, which is very important for our next quick lesson. But pushing out on that trigger, which is an option, is my VTOL toggle. On my right stick, that same trigger is actually how I'm going in and out of precision mode. And then my second button is another weapon control group if I have one. Now the reason I bring this up is because a lot of VTOL ships have really good control authority when it comes to doing something called a hockey stop. Think about a hockey player on the ring, and when it comes to a quick stop, he's cutting his blade into the ice kind of sideways to, you know, stop himself, stop that momentum. Here's an example of that in a spaceship. So if you're coming at the station, say you're flying in at, you know, 500-600 meters per second, and you're trying to angle yourself over to the pads using that velocity indicator, well, once you've got that indicator somewhere in the open, you can put yourself into VTOL mode and then go perpendicular to the actual direction. Look how fast we are slowing down. We've arrested all of our velocity real quickly by pointing the direction, pointing our VTOL engines the direction we're going and kind of doing that sideways hockey stop. It's also just really fun to do as you get better with decoupled flight and utilizing that ability, what we'll show in video 2 with the mining golem and how I use that sort of hockey stop to change directions when I'm scanning for materials and all. It just elevates the experience of flying in a huge way, and if you're in a tough situation, it can also be a way to quickly change direction to shake an enemy. With coupled mode always trying to bring you back to 0 or countering your thrust, you find yourself losing out on a lot of this thrust potential. Last bit of this video, we are going to talk about landing and the ways that you can master this by using your space brake versus using your main thrusters to change any given direction. So you can see, again, looking at my rear view, I see my prograde vector is open and in the clear, so I'm not worried that we're doing 500 meters per second right now. It is totally fine. You just want to get used to throwing yourself around, knowing where that velocity indicator is, and building that confidence in where your ship is going. That velocity indicator is your bread and butter, man. Moving that around, putting it where you want it, is the most important thing you can do. What we are going to do now, let's see, we are going to put this indicator right on top of that landing pad. About there should be good. Hopefully we don't overshoot. Kind of tough when you're further away. I'm going to go gear down, and I'm going to look away. And now I'm just going to use space brake because it's going to slow me down without changing my velocity vector, without changing the direction that I'm going. But I want to get down as I'm coming to the station to about 10 meters per second, and then before actual touchdown, I want to be around, you know, 5 meters per second or lower. And then you can, you know, pull yourself back, and look at that. We were not looking at that landing pad, but I knew because of where that velocity indicator was that the ship was going to maintain that path all the way to touchdown, and all I needed to do was hit my space brake as sort of an attitude control burst, like an RCS thruster on a spaceship, pretty much what they are, to slow myself down in a comfortable way that will land me safe. I typically like to actually touch the deck between like 2 to 5 meters per second for a nice smooth transition. If you come down at 10, you're going to chin slap in just about every ship. So in that last bit of distance that you're covering, it's kind of like SpaceX boosters doing their suicide burn where they cancel their velocity as they hit the pad. You're kind of doing that to some degree, but if you completely zero out before you get to the pad, you're going to end up just kind of hovering there. So it's nice to kind of keep, you know, a meter per second or so of drifts. That way you just come down, lightly touch. You guys will often see when I'm landing, I'll go into my Moby glass and get ready to hit refuel as my ship is still touching the pad, because I know in decoupled flight it's going to do that. You start to build those habits. Okay, so last part for the landing side is getting into a hangar horizontally or going in from the side. I had a buddy of mine in the org that was asking questions about how to do this smoothly the way I do it, because he would sort of overcorrect and maybe damage a ship going in. So same concept, you know, gears down, velocity indicator kind of in this general direction. I might not point directly at the hangar because I am bringing myself down more in line with it, and as I'm coming down I will start to compensate with the velocity indicator and raise it up. I'm changing my direction. It's delta V. I'm changing my my vector by applying thrust. Now I'm slowing down. I like to be below 50 meters per second as I come in. I'm gonna go a little slower just to talk this through. You see my velocity indicator is pointing forward at the yellow, right? So now what I do is I point it kind of down and then I just pull back on my thrust. You see what just happened? So as we're coming in, you're in a forward trajectory, and if you apply just a tiny little bit of downstrafe, it'll start to move that velocity indicator down. So natural thrust physics, since you're already at a slight downward trajectory, if you just pull back on your stick, just straight back, not a whole lot, just enough, you'll see that indicator will start to drop, and you can imagine it dropping down to directly below you, and you can sort of feel that with how the ship is moving to bring you down to that soft touchdown wherever you want in the pad. This is also how you see some of the more flashy pilots doing their sort of crazy landings as they're coming in. I'm going to piss in some people's Cheerios with this, but it is an illusion of just how cool decoupled flight can make you look. Now, it does require some skill to do some of the stuff where you're kind of coming in, pinching through the doors, flipping around, but it is not as hard as you might think once you just understand what the ship is doing in decoupled mode. So as you're coming in, so yeah, my doors aren't closing, that's fine, but it's not hard when you know what decoupled flight's doing, because you know your ship's going in the same direction to flip around and come to a stop. And it might look really flashy. You can come in more vertically, more crazy to make it look any way you want. But all I was doing there was trusting my velocity indicator, which was pointing inside, and then using only my space brake as I was maneuvering. That way my direction didn't change, just my speed. And then bringing it on down to touch on the pad. It's really not hard. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Questions, comments down below, please, for anything I might have missed for maybe some future videos. Parts 2 and 3 are on their way here shortly, so keep your eyes open. I will catch you guys out in the verse.